Hey, this is Pastor Travis Crocker from Rock Creek Baptist Church in Nashville, North Carolina. And I'm coming to you from Red Oak, and it's a cold and rainy day, but I think that really works for what we're talking about. Because even though we're in front of the manger scene, I know a lot of you recognize this and say, that's the manger scene in Red Oak. I want to use it as a sermon illustration, because it's still up, we're going to use it, to talk about something that we're going to mention on Sunday. Now, I'm not going to give you the full sermon here, because I want you to come to Drive-In Church on Sunday at 10:30 at 1238 Rock Creek Drive in Nashville, North Carolina. But I want to mention one thing to you. We're going to talk about the dedication of the temple in 2 Corinthians 1-7, what God was doing. God was building something. He was doing a great thing. And Solomon remembers times when it wasn't like this, when they didn't have a nice temple to worship in, that they met in a tent. And Solomon remembers they didn't always have nice houses. Solomon has a really nice place to live in, but he remembers a time when they didn't have all that, when they lived in booths or tents. They were temporary, and they would take them down and they would move to the next place when they were in the wilderness, when God had rescued them from Egypt. So they would build these booths. And so Solomon, when he dedicates the temple, he does it during the holiday. Now, those of us that plan out church calendars, we'd say you can't dedicate the church during a holiday. That's too much on the calendar. You got to wait and spread that stuff out a little bit more. But Solomon dedicates the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles. And that's still celebrated today. Observant Jews will build a Sukkot, which looks a lot like this, maybe a little bit bigger because they might want to fit more people in their family in there. And they put that on the side of their house temporarily, and they live in there. They sleep in there. They eat all their meals in there. And even though they might have it right next to a nice house, just to remind them there was a time when they didn't have a nice house, that their people had to be outside, whether it's cold and whether it's rainy. A lot of times they'll put branches on top, and it's to remind them we didn't have much, but God took care of us. And here, as we're going through this COVID-19 pandemic, we remember, yes, we can't meet physically in the church building because we're trying to keep everybody safe. We're going to meet in our cars, but there was a time when we didn't have a church building. We're going to meet in that parking lot. There's a time when we didn't have a building in that parking lot. Again, I'm not going to preach the whole sermon to you right here with a lot of cars driving by and dogs barking at me. But the question I want you to ask yourself as you prepare your hearts for worship on Sunday is, just as God prepared his people in the wilderness before he did something great, what might God be preparing our hearts for? What is God doing inside of you? What is God doing inside of his people? What great thing might God be building? Yes, COVID-19 is bad, it's awful, and I know it affects a lot of people in negative ways. But look at this from the silver lining to those clouds. Look at the positives of this. God can and will do great things in his people. If you want to go ahead and prepare in advance, you can read those first 7 chapters of 2 Corinthians. It'll only take you a minute. But I want you to ask yourself, what might God do in his people during this time?